Welcome to the In Memory of Man podcast, a show dedicated to the brave new world of crime, artificial intelligence, and you. The future is now. Here's your host, criminal trial lawyer, researcher, and author, Robert Kiesling.
Hello, welcome to the In Memory of Man podcast, Robot Crime Blog. I'm your host, Robert Kiesling. I do the research so you don't have to. Let me give you the quick rundown of the episode in a summary for those of you on Instagram and on the go that can't hear the podcast right now. So, in a nutshell, I'm talking about the contact tracing apps that Apple and Google are going to attempt to use, which I believe is an invasion of privacy. But more importantly, they are completely flawed with what data they're going to be using. How is that so? They're going to give you tons of false positives and false negatives. Here's an example of false positives, like on a crazy scale. So let's say you live in an apartment, never contacted your neighbor, don't know your neighbor. They are in next door. You are within a feet of them because you're on the other side of the drywall. But you've never been in contact with them and they have COVID-19. Well, now you've been labeled as someone who's been in contact with COVID-19. Let's say you're driving by a hospital that you may be living by, right? And let's say someone, 2 or 3 people that have COVID are driving out of that hospital and you're driving past them on a stop sign within 3 feet of the car. And your car is within 3 feet of their car. Guess what? That's a false positive. Now, what about the false negatives? Here's the problem with the false negatives. Those people that can't afford phones or won't are mostly or don't use them or can't and don't know how to use the more advanced phones with these apps are the elderly and the poor. So, and if those are the most at-risk groups, right? Then that's what's going to be called a false negative, because you're going to know within those groups, someone in those groups, a number of those people are possibly going to have the COVID virus. That's a false negative. And because you can't trace in that way, then you have a nightmare scenario of this digital calculation that is completely inaccurate. Okay, now for the rest of the podcast, and we're going to get into more detail about this. So that's horrible, right? But more importantly, let me get into what's happening over in China. And whatever happens over there now, it seems like because of the marriage between their corporations and their government, which is almost symbiotic and interchangeable, because China's government usually has a lot involved with the private corporations over there, allegedly private corporations. You are also seeing an increase, an uptick in the corporations, the digital corporations, technology corporations here in the United States with the government over here. And I think that that could be a dangerous thing if it is not somehow legislated and regulated. That's for a different podcast. But let's go back. The point being is that with China, you got to understand everything that's been happening over there slowly but surely is trickling over here because of the technocracy that is extremely powerful, and they have been dominating the landscape for a long time. All right. So green light or red light, China virus app is ticket to everywhere. Yeah, no, this is all their citizens have to download this app, red light, green light, yellow light app. If you have a green light, you can go anywhere. You have a yellow light, you have to go back home and quarantine. If you have a red light, you get taken somewhere for quarantine, allegedly up to 14 days, but we know that they do a little bit more than that with what they're quarantining over there. Yeah, just as some of the Muslims that have been put in re-education camps. So here's the problem with that, right? They have admitted other applications, they have glitches, right? And so you've had glitches where people that allegedly have COVID, right, over there have had green lights and it hasn't turned off. And then some of the people that are supposed to be green lights have red lights and it hasn't turned off. And you're talking about 1 billion people, right? Let's get back into the United States, and let's say we have the COVID contact tracing app that is used, right, with what information they have. Well, here's some problems that you're going to encounter with this app. Let's say that some hacker or someone uses this information there's like hundreds of millions of people in the United States. You have a voter suppression effort that false flags a polling station as an infectious hotspot. a business owner who attacks a rival by making false claims about their premises, which I think is the more likely, trolls sowing chaos, protesters triggering panic as a form of civil disobedience, and foreign intelligence agencies shutting down entire cities and adversary nations. Yeah, those are the heavy parts of having all that information and all that power centralized into a digital platform that is owned by private companies that are not only owned by private companies, but also hold a lot of our government sensitive data. So people, that should scare you. And just an article just came out in the San Francisco Gate, SF Gate. It's stating tech-assisted COVID-19 tracking is having some issues. So again, these tracking issues, some issues that they're having is the false positives, false negatives, and how are you getting to the phones for the people that are going to spread the most infectious? Just like when I read an article about the Navajo Nation, right? They were talking about there is a massive spread because of the homeless and the poor over there. And if you would have had this app, right, how would that have changed that scenario, right? Because you would not have known, you don't know how many of those people really had COVID and it didn't, and then you shut this entire town down. Yeah, they shut, God, I can't think of the name right now, but anyway, I'll have it. They shut an entire, roads, everything closed. I mean, shut down. You couldn't get in, couldn't get out, all because they were trying to say that certain people, or the large number, 1,000 people had it, and there were deaths. But the problem that you obviously have with that is the how to test for the COVID virus. And these tests have not been validated, folks. They have not been validated. And I wanted to get in a little bit of that. And I also have what's called the Daubert standard. The Daubert standard is what we use in court, among other things. And a certain guarantee of reliability. I have that link on my podcast, and I also have it on my vlog on the YouTube. So just let me run down some of the most technical things, right? Verification of previously validated methods, measuring interval, matrix effects, selectivity, sensitivity, accuracy, precision, reliability, trueness, limit of detection, and limit of quantitation, the limit of detection based on visual evaluation, standard deviation of the blank. I mean, I go on and on and on, man. That's what they have to use. That's what we have to use. And then it has to be validated. But instead, you have a free-for-all with all these companies stating, just like the one I mentioned prior to in prior episodes about how they went ahead and said, oh, hey, you know what? We can detect COVID by just your voice, right? And so then they go get a grant, or they go get funding to go and try to experiment with that, which is taking away money when they have no scientific data whatsoever that is accurate. I mean, how could you? And you have to see the other episode. I shred that to pieces, and it's just ridiculous. So then also you have the contact tracing groups funded by Soros and Gates as Chelsea Clinton on board, right? So again, you're going to have a number of false positives and false negatives with that, because where are they going to go, and how are they going to get that data? Goes back to what I said in a prior podcast. Facebook, Google, Apple, they're all going to use the data from Facebook or these groups by who? By you. And you being, you're going to be self-diagnosing whether you coughed, whether you sneezed, and then they're going to say whether another person coughed, whether they sneezed, whether they farted, whatever, right? Whether they have numbness, whether they think they have a hay fever, whether they drank the night before and they have a hangover and they feel the effects. And like, oh, I think I might. It's self-diagnosing. It is not healthy. Doctors will tell you that it's not healthy for the self-diagnosing. Then they create hotspots based on that self-diagnosing. And Facebook, Google, Apple can't deny that. And they can't deny the false positives. They can't deny the false negatives. It's all right there. All you got to do is look, click on the links, do your research. I know I do it so you don't have to, but it is there. I want you to see it, and you have to check that out. Now, that's not even touching the privacy concerns, the bills, the whole thing. But, I just want to make you aware of this right now. I couldn't do the podcast last week just because I had too much legal stuff. I have a day job, and I got to keep the lights on to try to get this going. So this week I'll have to substitute for both that time last week and this week. So anywho, I got to run. if Skynet or the technocracy doesn't take over by the time my next episode happens, or I get shadow banned and then unbanned and shadow banned by YouTube, which they did, or just banned, period, I will be back next week. Thank you. Take care.